I think the pandemic was a story of scientific victory coupled with political failure. It was just amazing to see the success of the scientific efforts to understand the pandemic and find ways to counter it. For most of history, humans were almost helpless in the face of pandemics. When the Black Death spread in the 14th century, killing about a third of the population of Asia and Europe, humans were helpless. They didn't understand what is causing the pandemic. They didn't understand how to stop it. They had no way to develop vaccines or to develop medicines. They had no concept even of a vaccine. Now with COVID-19, it took only about 2 weeks to identify the virus correctly. We know what is causing this disease. It took a few months to have a good grasp of how the disease spreads and how it can be slowed down. And it took about a year to develop several effective vaccines and start to mass produce them. So this was an enormous and unprecedented scientific success. But scientists only produced the tools to stop a pandemic. You need to make decisions about how to deploy these tools, how to use them. And this is not a scientific decision, this is a political decision. This is the job of politicians. And politicians, at least on the global level, they failed. You saw various countries, I think like Taiwan, who on a local level, on a national level, they made quite good decisions. But looking at the human level of the entire species, what we saw is a complete lack of cooperation. There was no global leadership on this. There was no global plan of action, how to stop the spread of the disease, how to contain it, how to share the medical resources equally between different countries in the world, how to deal with the economic consequences, the global economic consequences. No plan, no leadership, even today, still. We saw instead of this pandemic causing humans to appreciate the interests we have in common, hey, we have a common enemy, this virus, let's unite against this common enemy. Instead of driving people together to cooperate, the exact opposite happened. We saw greater and greater disunity as a result of the pandemic, leading, among other things, to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is really a direct continuation of what we saw during the pandemic. And this is extremely unfortunate. I don't know what will be in the future. Nobody can predict the future. The future is the result of decisions we make today. We can still make better decisions. COVID is not the last pandemic. There could be, there will be more pandemics, even worse ones, unless we unite and establish a global system to alert people about future pandemics and to coordinate our efforts. If we cooperate, COVID could be the last big pandemic in history, because we have the scientific and technological tools to stop pandemics. You know, one of the principles of history is that we should never underestimate human stupidity. It's one of the most powerful forces in history. Very often we see in history things happen which are not rational, which don't serve the interests of anybody, and yet they happen. If you look at war in the 21st century, it makes very little sense. You know, in previous eras, you could at least argue that even if war is a terrible thing, and even if it causes a lot of suffering, at least for some countries it makes sense, because you wage war, you conquer the neighboring countries, you become more powerful, you become more prosperous. But this doesn't really work like this anymore in the world, because the nature of economic power has changed. For most of history, the basis of the economy was material assets like wheat fields or rice fields or gold mines. And you could conquer these things by war. So you could make yourself a big, powerful nation by conquering your neighbors. This is no longer the case. The real source of economic power today in the world is knowledge. It's scientific knowledge, it's organizational knowledge. You know, you think about Taiwan and the semiconductor industry, which is the basis, you know, of the digital revolution and so forth. It's not because there are silicon mines in Taiwan that you mine, no. It's because of knowledge. Again, not just scientific knowledge, but also organizational knowledge, how to build a good corporation. Now, this is something you cannot conquer by war, because it's here. It's not a mine in the land that you can just take. So war makes less economic sense. And you see all the recent examples of countries which were once poor and became prosperous. They didn't get there by waging war. Russia has been waging one war after the other, and it's economically bankrupt. The only thing the Russian economy has is oil and gas, which you can take out of the land. But they are not advancing in any of the more developed sectors of the economy. Similarly, another thing that why war doesn't make so much sense anymore is because of nuclear weapons. That if you push war too much, the result will be just a complete annihilation of everyone. You cannot win a nuclear war. And this is why since 1945, great powers have never come to direct clash between one another, because it's obvious you can't win such a war. So for these reasons, wars make less sense. How is it then that Russia invaded Ukraine? Because they made a senseless decision. They just made a huge, huge mistake. A huge mistake not just in underestimating the bravery and the efficiency of the Ukrainians who are fighting for their independence. They also made a huge miscalculation, the Putin regime, about the interests of Russia itself. They are undermining Russia's own interests in waging this war. You know, as a Russian citizen, I'm not going to gain anything. Even if Putin succeeds in conquering a few pieces of land from Ukraine, how would this make the life of the average Russian citizen any better? For many years, Putin has been diverting economic resources from healthcare, from education, from welfare to the army, to build tanks, to accumulate artillery shells. So as a Russian citizen, I get less healthcare because of this. It makes no sense. Russia is a rich country with very, very poor citizens. A second thing on the geopolitical level, this war has basically destroyed Russia's position as a great power and is turning Russia into a puppet state of China. Russia is increasingly dependent on China. So, you know, even if you are this, extreme Russian nationalist, you should be opposed to this war. The sooner this war ends, the better it is for Russia. But again, we should never underestimate human stupidity. People can go on making really senseless and stupid decisions. For a considerable period of time, two people fighting, a third person comes along and wins everything. So this is not what's happening with Russia and China. I mean, Russia is now in struggle with NATO, and the ones that is making the biggest profit out of it geopolitically is China, which is staying out of the war and thereby getting into a stronger position. It is causing greater disunity in the world, especially economically. Countries are now reluctant to base their national economy on imports from countries they don't trust. So the whole idea of globalization, that you can trust everybody and you can take your oil from one country and your raw materials from here and there, it's in reverse now. The supply chains are getting shorter countries trust one another less and less. And this is one of the things that is fueling inflation and the rise of prices and economic crisis all over the world. Because globalization, it had many problems, but it definitely kept prices down. Now when we enter an era of deglobalization, because of the war and earlier because of the pandemic, this is one fundamental reason that prices of everything are going up. If you want to produce everything in your country or in nearby countries that you trust, it will cost you a lot more money. Another thing that we see is that as the international order is being destabilized, there are more tensions in more and more places around the world. And we will see, if this continues, we will see defense budgets all over the world skyrocket. You know, in recent years, the average expenditure on defense, on the military, out of the national budget, all over the world, was about 6%, which is very, very, very low. For most of history, all the emperors and kings and sultans, they spent most of their budget on their military and navy and fortresses and things like that. In recent decades, we had huge improvement in healthcare, in education, in welfare, largely because countries spent less on defense and more on these issues. If now this goes into reverse, and this is already happening, we will see defense budgets skyrocket, not 6%, but 12%, 20%, 50% going to the military. This will come at the expense of healthcare, of education, of welfare, of scientific development, of dealing with climate change. So not only people in Ukraine will feel the consequences. Everywhere around the world, people will be worse off. The money that should go to nurses or to teachers would instead go to tanks and to cyber weapons. You know, if you have you're in school and there is a rule that you shouldn't hit other kids, and some bully comes and beats up a weaker kid, if nothing happens, if you allow the bully to just beat this other kid, then the social order collapses and everybody starts beating each other because, you know, the norm is broken. But if the bully is stopped and punished for what he has done, then actually the norm becomes stronger. And people now all over the world, all kinds of regimes all over the world are watching what is happening with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If the Russians get away with it, then we will see more and more Putins all over the world. You know, every time in history is special in one way or the other. Now we face new dangers. One new danger is climate change and ecological collapse caused by irresponsible human behavior. And the other new danger is the rise of technologies like artificial intelligence, AI, which have the potential to completely disrupt the whole of human society. And this, I think, is the most complicated challenge. Because with climate change, maybe we are not effective in dealing with it, but at least nobody wants it. It's clear what the goal is. With AI and other disruptive technologies, most people don't fully understand what are the implications of these technologies. And even the experts who do understand, they do not agree what should be done. Things that are the nightmares of some people are the fantasies of other people. There is no agreement what should be done with AI. So to give just one idea about how revolutionary this technology is, all previous technologies in human history, from stone knives to atom bombs, they increased human power because the decision about how to use the technology always remained in human hands. Even if you produce an atom bomb, the atom bomb cannot decide how to use itself. With AI, it's the first technology in history that can make decisions by itself. It can make decisions about itself. Like if you have a killer robot an autonomous weapon system. The robot decides who to fire on, when to fire on, not a human being. This is the first time this is happening in human history. We are in danger of losing control of our own future. And this is something that I hope more and more people, especially politicians, realize. And we need to regulate it before it's too late. It's an extremely dangerous development.